The Aardwolf reached the termite run after night had already settled into the grass. This was the hour it preferred, not because it was fully dark, but because the land had stopped changing quickly. Heat no longer lifted scent abruptly. Insects moved with purpose rather than confusion. The ground had chosen how it would behave until morning. The run lay ahead as a faint, pale seam through the savannah. It was not open ground. It was not broken ground. It was thinned. Thousands of termites had passed beneath this line night after night, carving shallow corridors just under the surface. They removed soil grain by grain, reinforcing their tunnels from below while leaving a fragile crust above them intact. From a distance, the run looked firm. Up close, it felt uncertain. The Aardwolf approached slowly, muzzle low, ears angled forward. Its body was narrow and light, but it carried weight differently from faster hunters. It stayed longer in one place. It waited. That mattered here. The Aardwolf placed one paw onto the run. The surface answered immediately. Dry, compact, stable enough. No sound, no crack, no shift. The soil held shape under light pressure. The Aardwolf did not move. It waited. Waiting allowed the ground to finish deciding. Several seconds passed. Then the surface changed, not by breaking, but by accepting. The crust compressed downward a fraction, so little it could not be seen, only felt. The pressure did not rebound. It stayed. The surface had given slowly. The Aardwolf froze completely. This was the danger of termite runs. They did not fail suddenly. They responded in stages. The first response was agreement. The Aardwolf shifted its weight slightly forward. Again, the ground held. Again, it softened after. The soil beneath was not collapsing. The tunnels were adjusting, redistributing weight into adjacent chambers. The surface remained intact, but the support beneath it was thinning. The Aardwolf began to move along the run, placing each paw carefully, keeping its body aligned with the corridor so pressure travelled forward rather than outward. This slowed collapse. The vibrations beneath grew stronger. Not loud. Numerous. Termites were active below, flowing away from compressed sections, rerouting through deeper passages. Their movement formed a soft, constant trembling in the soil. The Aardwolf stopped where the vibrations were strongest and lowered its head. This was a feeding point. It scraped gently, removing only a thin layer of soil. The surface opened without tearing. Termites spilled upward briefly, disoriented by light and pressure. The Aardwolf fed slowly, tongue moving rhythmically, careful not to widen the opening too much. Feeding aggressively would collapse tunnels and scatter prey. Behind it, the surface changed again. Not at the feeding spot. Several body lengths back. The weight of the Aardwolf caused the run to settle further behind it, the crust sagging inward as tunnels collapsed one by one. The movement was silent and delayed. The surface gave after the Aardwolf had passed. The Aardwolf lifted its head and listened. The vibration pattern changed. Termite flow weakened behind it and strengthened ahead where tunnels were still intact. The Aardwolf adjusted position, stepping off the run briefly and then back onto it farther along. The surface held, then yielded, again. The pattern was consistent now. The run was losing its ability to resist. Each step shortened the delay between contact and response. What had taken seconds earlier now happened almost immediately. The Aardwolf tested one more section, closer to where the run widened slightly. The paw pressed down. The surface did not crack. It flowed. A shallow depression formed, spreading outward like a slow breath. Soil sank into underlying tunnels without opening a hole. The movement continued even after the Aardwolf withdrew its paw. The Aardwolf stepped back fully. Seconds later, the surface settled further, then stopped. The run was finished. Not destroyed. Exhausted. The Aardwolf waited until all vibrations ceased, then stepped onto a solid ground beside the run, where soil compressed and released honestly, without delay. From there, it watched the pale line in the grass. To the eye, nothing had changed. The run was still visible, still intact, still usable. But the Aardwolf knew. The surface had crossed a threshold. Ground that gave slowly was no longer negotiating. It was learning how to give faster. The Aardwolf turned away and moved toward another feeding area downslope, one that had not yet been pressed, not yet thinned by patience. Behind it, the termite run lay quiet, holding its shape, waiting for the next body to trust that holding meant strength. The lesson settled deeply. The most dangerous ground was not the ground that broke, it was the ground that agreed. Quietly, gradually, and only after weight had already decided to stay, the Aardwolf returned to the termite run later that same night, not because hunger demanded it, but because the ground had asked a question. Termite runs changed with use. They were not fixed structures. They were negotiations that evolved with every passage, every pause, every moment of pressure held too long. The Aardwolf approached from a different angle this time, descending slightly downslope so its weight would load the run unevenly. The grass here was shorter. The soil beneath had dried harder after the last rain, forming a thinner crust over older tunnels. The run still looked intact. That meant nothing now. The Aardwolf stepped onto it and stopped. The surface resisted briefly, less than before. The firmness felt shallow, as if the crust were stretched tight over a widening emptiness. The Aardwolf waited. The response came faster this time. Not collapse, not cracking. A smooth, immediate settling. The ground no longer paused to consider. It adjusted almost as soon as weight arrived, sinking a fraction and holding that new shape. The surface had learned. The Aardwolf lifted one paw and placed it ahead. Again, the same response, firmness, then quick yielding. The delay had shortened from seconds to moments. This was dangerous. Slow yielding could be managed. It gave time to react. Fast yielding removed that margin without offering clear failure. The Aardwolf moved along the run carefully, shortening its steps, reducing time spent on any one point. The vibrations beneath were weaker now, more scattered. Termites were abandoning the central corridor, rerouting deeper where collapse had not yet reached. Feeding efficiency dropped sharply. The Aardwolf tested a shallow scrape anyway. Fewer termites surfaced. The prey had already learned the surface was no longer stable. The Aardwolf stopped feeding. It followed the run not to eat, but to watch how it failed. In one section, the surface no longer weighted at all. As soon as the Aardwolf's paw touched, the soil eased downward in a wide, shallow depression. No sound, no break, just acceptance. The Aardwolf withdrew immediately, but the ground continued to sink. For several seconds after contact ended, the surface kept moving, settling deeper as internal tunnels collapsed in sequence. The response had become independent of pressure. This was the threshold. The run was no longer reacting. It was finishing a process already underway. The Aardwolf waited until all movement ceased, then stepped off the run entirely. It moved parallel to it, placing paws on undisturbed ground where soil still compressed and released honestly. From there, it observed. The run now showed subtle changes to the eye, slight dimples, shallow sags that caught shadow differently. Still no holes, still no obvious breaks, but the structure beneath had changed completely. The Aardwolf tested another section lightly with the side of its paw, applying sideways pressure. The surface slid inward immediately, like a skin stretched too thin. The run was finished for the night. The Aardwolf turned away without hesitation. It moved toward another feeding corridor closer to a termite mound, where construction had reinforced tunnels with thicker walls. There, the surface still resisted longer, still negotiated. As it fed, the Aardwolf remained alert to ground response, moving constantly, never allowing weight to linger. It fed less efficiently, but safely. From a distance, the abandoned run lay pale and quiet in the grass. To a human eye, it was unchanged. To the Aardwolf, it was exhausted. The lesson sharpened. Ground that gave slowly was dangerous because it invited patience. Ground that learned to give faster punished it. The most dangerous moment was not the first yielding. It was the moment when yielding no longer waited. The Aardwolf left the area before dawn, choosing routes that had not yet been tested, carrying with it a precise understanding of where pressure still mattered, and where the surface had already agreed to let go without warning. Because in a landscape shaped by insects and time, survival depended not on finding the richest place, but on knowing exactly when a place had finished pretending to hold. The final change did not arrive at night. It arrived earlier, under the sun. The Aardwolf sensed it the next evening before it ever reached the termite runs. The smell of the grass was wrong, not burned, not wet, not freshly broken. It was pressed, flattened in many directions, then left to dry. Hooves, not a herd, not a rush. A slow passage. Goats or cattle had moved through the area during the day, grazing lightly, stopping often, loading the ground again and again without tearing it open. The pressure had been gentle, patient, and repeated. That was enough. When the Aardwolf reached the run, it stopped immediately. The surface looked better than before, smoother, more continuous, less uneven. To an inexperienced animal, it would have looked safer. The Aardwolf stepped onto it cautiously. The surface resisted firmly, more firmly than it had on previous nights. The crust had been sealed by hooves pressed evenly from above. Irregular weak points had been flattened. The run felt strong. For a moment. Then the ground began to move, not locally, globally. The surface did not yield at the point of contact. It sank across a broad section of the run, spreading outward well beyond the Aardwolf's body length. The movement was slow, silent, and decisive, as if the ground had already accepted that it would no longer resist. The Aardwolf stepped back instantly. The ground continued to settle. Seconds passed, then more seconds. The surface kept lowering, redistributing weight even though none remained. Internal tunnels collapsed in sequence, like a system finishing a task it had been trained to complete. This was no longer delayed yielding, it was automatic. The Aardwolf waited until all motion ceased, then tested the edge of the run with a sideways push. The surface slid inward immediately, offering no resistance at all. The negotiation was over. The termites had already responded. Vibration beneath the surface was sparse and deep, no longer concentrated near the run. The corridor that once guided feeding had been abandoned. The insects had retreated downward, away from the collapsing roof. The run was dead. Livestock had not destroyed it violently. They had perfected its failure. By pressing the surface repeatedly without breaking it, they had sealed the crust while ensuring that all remaining voids would collapse together under even light, patient weight. The Aardwolf moved along the former run without stepping on it, observing how far the effect had spread. Adjacent soil that had also been grazed behaved the same way, firm to the touch, then compliant without warning. Only beyond the grazing line did the ground begin to argue again, resisting briefly before yielding. The Aardwolf turned away. This place was finished. It would not recover quickly. Rain might rebuild tunnels eventually, but until then, the surface would behave as a single unit, holding until it did not, offering no delay, no warning, no margin. The Aardwolf moved toward the edge of the grazing area, where grass grew unevenly and hooves had not passed. There, termite runs still behaved like systems rather than habits. Before leaving, it climbed a small rise and looked back. The land looked improved, even, firm, usable. To humans, it would appear managed. To the Aardwolf, it was simplified in the worst possible way. The lesson completed itself. Ground that gave slowly could be learned. Ground that gave quickly could be avoided. Ground that had been trained to give automatically could not be trusted at all, because it no longer responded to weight. It responded to history. The Aardwolf slipped into the darker grass beyond the grazing line, choosing feeding grounds where the surface still hesitated, where pressure still mattered, and where the earth had not yet been taught to stop arguing. In landscapes shaped by small creatures and long time, survival depended on recognizing one final shift, the moment when the ground stopped deciding and began obeying instead.